Listening to News Talk 1400 KFRU. Those of you who have been longtime listeners know that regularly we have on a program that's organized most of the time by somebody from the MU Interdisciplinary Center on Aging, and that is now Peggy Gray. It used to be David Oliver. Met him through that and always enjoyed the conversations that we had. Oftentimes it would be just him. Sometimes it would be him and others that he would bring who were doing research or clinic practice through the MU Interdisciplinary Center on Aging. And through him also met Debbie Parker Oliver, who is the professor of Department of Family and Community Medicine and has worked with hospice, long-term care, palliative care, and managed hospice programs in the past. It's good to see you. How are you?
Hey, it's good to see you, David.
David Oliver, your husband passed away. It's coming up on a year. And in just a couple of weeks, it's going to be a year.
Yeah, hard to believe.
Yeah, we were talking off the air about how in some ways that seems like it's been a real short time. And sometimes it seems like it's really been a long time. And I can't explain why it feels that way. I doubt if anybody can explain that.
Yeah, and it feels the same way to me, too. It depends on the mood and what we're thinking about. There's been so many changes in our family that makes it feel like a long time. And yet, oftentimes, the freshness of the grief still makes it feel like yesterday.
The title of our topic today, Chalkboard Legacies, A Journey Through Dying and Learning to Live Again. David Oliver, he didn't shy away from what he was going through in the final about 4 years of his life. He addressed the cancer. He said, we're going to do certain things, and knowing that the result probably wasn't going to be a healing, I'm going to face what I've got left a certain way. I mean, that's one of the legacies.
Yeah, there's no question about that, and that he wanted to talk about it and use the opportunity to teach medical students and to get the public to realize that death doesn't need to be a stranger.
So what do you think, what has been feedback that you have received? Anything that sticks out in your mind that those who heard his message or know the story have said since then, this means what to me?
You know, I get emails, and we still get posts put onto our blog regularly where people talk about how it's helped. I'll never forget, we were actually in the outpatient unit with an emergency one day, and someone came up to him and personally was able to thank him for sharing his journey and shared how the videos had been helpful to them, and that was so meaningful to him. And every one of those comments that I still receive brings me meaning and reminds me that, you know, there is good in the midst of all of this difficult stuff that we had over 42 months.
There have been a couple of very nationally very effective books recently, and I can't for the life of me remember the one that I've got near my bed, written by, I think the doctor's first name is Atwell.
Yes.
Is it about death?
Being Mortal.
Being Mortal. Being Mortal is the name. And then another one just more recently than that about a young 30-something physician, and it's called When Breath Becomes Air.
Yes.
So those books deal straight on with our mortality. One written by a man who was going through, knowing his mortality, very real facing him, and another one, a doctor who was writing in a broader perspective about what that means. So how are you feeling about the conversation that you and David were very active in saying, folks, this is a real part of what it means to be a human being?
You know, it's wonderful that those things are being written, and Stuart Scott recently released a book as well.
Stuart Scott, the ESPN.
You know, the gap in the literature, and one, quite frankly, that I'm looking at is nobody talks about this as a family disease. David had cancer cells in his body, but our family had cancer. And we went through every single treatment and the whole process. And then time afterwards, David was a strong advocate in talking about the difficulties that this causes for families as well. And that you go through this process and this caregiving, and then in the end, he gets out of it, so to speak, and we're left to try to, pick up the pieces. And those pieces get ignored in the literature.
he gets out of it. That is really interesting, because when I hear you say that, I'm thinking of a couple of things. One is, and you say in something I'm going to refer to in a moment, that he said, death would be like going over the waterfall.
Yeah.
So you get out of it, in a sense, by no longer are you present physically, human form on this earth. But then there was a time prior to his death that you describe in this paper that I have, where he got out of it because he couldn't communicate anymore, but he was still alive.
Yeah, and
interesting how you wrote, and I won't go into a lot of details about this, but I could, but how he chose how he wanted to say goodbye. And I don't think from the outside the feeling I got was there was a lot of rhyme or reason why it was important to say certain things to some people and maybe nothing to other people.
Not a reason that I could pick up anyway. It was really kind of surprising. I can tell you that hearing him say goodbye, especially to his sons and our grandson, was incredibly powerful. And I was lucky to hear that, even though as heartbreaking as it is. And yet he didn't say goodbye to other people who I would have expected. And I don't know if that's because he just expected us to all be there at the end and so didn't know when to say goodbye. But those are the things that happen that you just don't, you can't anticipate.
I'm going to read a part of this. And again, Debbie Parker Oliver is our guest. We're talking about David Oliver's end of life. But again, you're talking about this. It's very personal to you, but you're saying to others, this is what it's like. This is what it can be like. I mean, death happens differently, but there are some patterns. And in this case, I feel like you're fortunate to have been able to go through what you did. Because I can think of other situations in my life which didn't have, knowing the end of life was near, but not expecting it to come because the certain signs weren't as imminent as what you experienced with David. I
absolutely agree that we were blessed. And I think actually in all aspects, looking back, if there's an ideal way that things could happen, that's what we experienced. And a large part of that's because David was so honest and open about what he wanted and how he wanted it to be. And we worked to make that happen.
Having said that, and I agree with what you just said, at the same time, there's a part of me that wonders if, what some of us say, and occasionally it's flippantly, when I go, I just want to go.
Yeah.
And part of me reading what you've written, I thought, wouldn't it have been better just to go?
For him,
but I don't know. I don't think so. But I think those, again, I think we have to admit the contradictory emotions and intellectual processing that is going through this time period.
And I think there's a lot to be said that maybe it's easier on the individual who dies to go quickly. On the other hand, we got to accomplish his bucket list, and he got to say everything that he needed to say. And I know for our grief, that's been really important. And when my grandson and David's oldest son, when they say, we said everything we needed to say, there was absolutely nothing else that we needed to say. There were no if-onlys, so to speak. And that's a blessing. And he knew he was loved, and that's important. Not everybody has that.
A couple of things that you wrote. My professional knowledge of the signs of impending death was one source of information. However, it was the emotion in my heart that spoke the loudest. Witnessing my extroverted life of a party, outspoken man begin to withdraw into himself, stare into space, distance himself from the world was unbelievably painful. I'm not reading this to ask you to comment on it. You wrote those things, you felt those things, but I think sharing that is something that is so real. Another thing that you said later on, needless to say, moments of intimacy are rare in the weeks leading to death. Instead, we focused on savoring the moment, surviving the demands, and overseeing so many different problems. But you'll remember that moment of intimacy that you had, and especially at the end where you... you knew as the hours went on, you're exhausted mentally and physically. You have, I think, a couple of daughters there.
Yeah.
And you're saying, we'll have to stay here. We'll try to grab snippets of sleep when we can. You did. And then they fell asleep, but you were there.
Yeah. And at the very end, I was fortunate to be alone with him,
Yep.
and that's how he wanted it. It's kind of amazing how his will went through to the very end, and so we were able. He used the acronym HOPE. He wanted to die at home, surrounded by others, pain-free, and excited until the end. And I think that happened. The night before he died, we had a party, so to speak, at our house with friends and family. Our daughter joined by the internet. People were able to say, "I love you," "Goodbye," "Thank you." That's as good as it gets. And he was very pleased, I'm sure.
One of the things I've heard and one of the things you write about is that others who have been witness to the passing of someone after a long time of struggling speak of saying it's okay to let go.
Yeah, and and we need to know how to say goodbye, so to speak, in those final hours, and giving permission to go on, and assurance that we'll be okay was an important part of that. And luckily, my hospice experience had taught me that. Knowing when to do that, I used to tell people, "You'll just know," and that's exactly the position I was in. I could feel that he was hanging on. His heart was incredibly labored, and it was time. And it was only moments after I said those things that he clearly had stopped breathing.
One of the reasons I think we talk about this today is you're telling people, don't fear death. Prepare how you want to die. I mean, that's a blunt thing. I even hear myself saying that, but that's what you're saying. He was able to do, and if anything, if he can show the example of how to do that, then that's what you need to do.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. And because he told us what he wanted, then that was our mission, and we were able to do that, and we were blessed. It's not easy. There was nothing easy about it. This is not something that you choose, but at least he had control of the way that he died. And what more can you give? What's bigger gift can you give someone?
I have no doubt that he wasn't pleased that it was carried out as he wished.
Yeah.
You said you still have a presence on the internet someplace where people could come and find out more.
Yeah, our video blog is still active at dbocancerjourney.blogspot.com. And it still has the 28 videos that we made, as well as those from his memorial service.
I've watched all of those, and even the memorial service. Thank you for what you've done and for what you continue to do. Our thoughts and prayers are with you as you continue. This isn't a 1 year and it's past. It's a rest of your life thing. And people who are listening know that.
Yeah.
Whether they've lost a child, whether they've lost a spouse or anybody else that's very close to them that's impacted their life. It's a, you'll celebrate, but you also lose. And
he used to say, the more you love, the more you grieve.
Yeah.
And focus on the love side of the equation. So that's what we try to do.
Debbie Parker Oliver, Professor, Department of Family and Community Medicine, talking about David Oliver, who was regularly here and brought smiles to this studio regularly, and would say, have a quality day.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is KFRU.